Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Scar here for the first time in a while. Wanting to talk about the Bowser Challenger and Big Boys real quick. Just a couple of tips about building these kits that I wanted to go over. The model in front of you is the second Challenger that I have built or am about to finish. The first one I did a build log on this channel. It was not very well done. It was spray painted and it really needs a repaint. But the most important thing is that it ran really well. And so I'm going to go over a couple of tips and tricks about these models again, and this will apply to both the Challengers and the Big Boys. So just this particular model here is a Bowser Redlands Challenger. This was built in Redlands, California by the original Bowser Company. This is a copper boiler Challenger. And so if you look at this locomotive, you'll see these spots here, these silver spots. And that's sanding marks. That was where I sanded this locomotive. And if you're going to do any sort of filing on your boiler or body work or anything, you'll want to get a set of good automotive sandpaper. I start at 400 grit, go to 600, then 800, then 1,000, and that'll smooth out any scratches that you have on your locomotive. So that's a really good tool to have when you build these. Another thing is, if you're going to apply one of these super detailed kits, you want to get a really nice titanium drill bit set, and you can get one for about 20 bucks that comes with all sorts of different drill bits that you can use to drill on these super detailed parts. So anyways, let's get started. First thing I wanted to talk about, and I have a little prop here, is the frame. If we look at the Challenger frame, we will see that it is very thin in the middle here. And this is a weak point on these locomotives. This is really the major sort of design flaw, is on this frame right here. This hole is for the single gear on each of the frames that drives the locomotive. When you assemble these kits, you want to make sure that there's going to be nothing, no burrs or pieces inside the frame, particularly inside these little bearing recesses here that the brass bearings on the wheels fit into, that will cause any sort of issue when you put the cover plate on. See, when you put the cover plate on with the wheels on this frame, you're basically squishing, you're squeezing the frame. And if you have any sort of material that's popping, that's pushing out either this way towards the camera or away, whether it be towards the actual cover plate, which would be on this frame, or towards the frame, you're gonna cause either the frame or the axle plate to bend. And what happens is that the frame will bend and break. It will just snap. It'll snap right here on these little bearing recesses right in the middle, because it's the weak point in the frame, and it will snap and your frame will be ruined. So you want to make sure that your bearing recesses are well filed out, and that you can really tell that that things are okay if you just sort of take it slow, put all of your driving wheels in first, and tighten down both screws about halfway. That way, as long as everything is still flush, you're probably fine. The next thing I wanted to talk about, is the side rod guides here, and it's sort of hard to see with the Challenger in the background here, but these side rod guides, I believe they're soldered on by the factory, and they would stick out. They would go from here to here, and that's what your side rod guides on this thing right here, that right there. And if they fall off, it's not too big of a deal. I would recommend reattaching those with JB Weld. If you try to resolder these, you'll end up melting these pieces here, and your frame will not be usable. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the eccentric crank, mounting the eccentric crank. There are two three technically ways to do this, and I've used two methods on this build. There's a really good way, and then there's an okay way. And the really good way, which I'll get to, is the way that I will be moving forward indefinitely. The way I've done it here is that I've simply screwed in the original screw, and I've soldered that screw to the crank pin, and that keeps it in place. But the only issue with that is that basically your crank pin is permanently attached to your crank is permanently attached to the pin, and that could cause some issues with either having to do maintenance rarely or painting. Actually, that would cause an issue, because if you wanted to paint your rods, you would have to either brush paint this, or I don't really know, but that is an issue, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to paint this front frame because it has that. So you'll see a video of this locomotive when it's done. It's almost done. Again, it runs perfectly. It just hasn't been painted yet, or it's still missing the headlight hasn't been permanently attached, and it's missing the handrails, the front pilot handrails. So this is the correct way, really the best way to mount your eccentric crank onto your crank pin, and that would be using a 0090 screw and nut. The 0090 will thread right into the original hole, so you won't have to worry about drilling it out. The 0090 screw, it will go in, no issues, and you just simply tighten it up, tighten your nut on. And I made sure everything was nice and firm, and I still had quite a lot of screw left, so I just took a Dremel and saw, and with a saw tool or whatever, and cut it right off. The next thing is that on your main side rod here that connects your driving wheels, is you want to make sure that your screws are screwed into the recess portion on the rods. If not, that will cause your rod to want to walk the screw out, or it'll bite the head off the screw, depending on how either if you just Loctite on the screw, or just how strong the rod is. I guess it'll want to bite that head off, so you don't want to do that. So anyways, you want to make sure that the screws are lined up, that your rods are lined up with the recess on the screw, and then there'll just be basically a regular hole here for the crank pin, and it'll be like that on every rod. Another thing is you'll want to use, especially on your crank here, your eccentric crank, you'll want to use some just a drop of Loctite on the end of a toothpick to make sure that your crank pin here isn't going to unscrew itself. That's very important, especially on the crank pin. Very, very important that you put some Loctite on there. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the joints between the drive shafts on the Challenger, particularly the original ones. The original ones are a rubber sort of little cylinder that connect. There'll be one at the motor, one here, and one here, and you can see my drive shafts inside ever so slightly, and I'll talk about those in a second. But the original ones are again, the rubber shafts, or the rubber universal joints, and those are no good, especially now, 60 years later or so after these kits were first built. They have dry rotted, and they're just better options out there anyways, that you can use. I have decided to go with, and I will be doing this from now on, I have another one of these to build, plus a big boy, is I'm going to use A-line universal joints. Those work exceptionally well. I have used 3 on this locomotive. This locomotive works great. There's almost really no extra noise or anything concerning that, so I would highly recommend the A-line universal joints. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and if you've ever built one of these, you know that this is an issue, is getting this rear frame to line up with the screw holes here in the back of the boiler and with the two sort of studs that come down off the boiler. This can seem like a bit of an issue, and there's a few areas that you want to pay close attention to when you go to mount your rear frame onto the boiler. First thing you want to look at is you want to make sure that your drive wheels around the firebox have enough clearance so that when everything is screwed in, that your boiler is not pushing down onto your driving wheels. And you want to be really careful about this, actually, because if you over tighten everything, you have the chance of breaking this frame. So you want to be really careful. So I had to file out the firebox on both sides on this model to give enough clearance for this for the rear set of drivers here. The next thing you want to look at is you want to look at the clearances or tolerances on this rear boiler plate. Let me move the model a little bit forward here. Is on this rear boiler frame joint plate sort of thing here. This particular model needed both the plate and the actual area inside the boiler. There's sort of a lip here. It needed both areas filed. And after the combination of the firebox being filed plus the boiler and plate being filed, I was able to get the front studs here to meet up correctly with the holes in the smoke box or in the steam chest, and also have the rear plate line up. So that is very important. Again, you want to be super careful about testing this or trying this for the first time, because you run the risk of snapping your rear frame because you'll have too much pressure up here, and it'll basically have your frame sort of like at an angle like this. So again, you really want to check right here on this area, both sides on the smoke box. And that's really all I have. Again, this is just a couple of things that I've learned while building these. I'm sure there's people with a lot more experience than me, but again, these are just my 2 cents. And that's really all I have for the time being. So thanks for watching.